I saved my sister's life. At least that's how she tells it. I was 9, she was 3. We lived in a 2-family house with our grandparents. One night my parents went out and my grandparents were watching us. We went upstairs to get something. I don't know, maybe it was a Cabbage Patch Kid. It was 1983. I heard suspicious noises from behind the bathroom door. Something felt wrong. I quickly turned us around and rushed back down. Turns out, 2 people broke in through the bathroom skylight, burglarized the house, and left the way they came in. Simply turning us around avoided a confrontation with armed burglars. From this, I learned that there are small actions we take all the time that have major consequences. What if I told you there were small actions that you could take that would prevent genocide? You can prevent genocide by taking small actions to preserve democracy. But what does it mean to preserve democracy? Well, democracy is a form of governance that reflects the will of the people. Democracies are more likely than autocracies to secure peace, protect their citizens, and uphold human rights. To preserve democracies, we need to preserve democratic institutions like free and fair elections and free press. Backsliding is a significant erosion of those institutions. This happens when democratically elected leaders take small actions that chip away at our norms. These chips and changes appear insignificant until the danger is too great to repair. Freedom House is a nonpartisan organization founded on the belief that freedom flourishes where governments are accountable to their people. They determined that global democracy suffered its worst crisis in decades in 2017. Russia and China interfered with foreign elections and set trends that, if unchecked, would replace democracy with oppression. The United States was not immune to this trend. We supported authoritarians, withdrew from binding international agreements, and rejected a free press, fair elections, and ethical norms. Because of this, American democracy is in crisis. Tolly Nates, executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, said, "Genocide happens when democracy is absent." The peaceful transfer of power, a milestone that indicates the stability of our government, was a hallmark of our democracy. However, on January 6, 2021, this was upended. To preserve democracy, all political players must accept election results and reject violence in the political process. You must protect against these small actions that harm our democracy, and remember, small actions can harm as well as help. Founder of Genocide Watch, Gregory Stanton, describes genocide as a process that develops in 10 stages that are predictable but not inevitable. Each one is an escalation in hostility. The most egregious acts happen later, so by acting early, we can stop genocide. Holocaust survivors, genocide scholars, and Stanton himself sounded alarms when they recognized stages happening in America. ICE classified families. ICE classified families, detaining Latino asylum seekers and forcibly removing children from their families. Mexican immigrants were dehumanized, called filth, infesting the country. White supremacist militias have been organizing, and the media and members of Congress polarized by amplifying propaganda that jeopardizes the integrity of the election process and endangers election officials. The government also withdrew from binding international agreements and organizations. Together, these actions destabilized our democracy and threatened our institutions. These are all symptoms of a failing democracy. These are examples of backsliding. You can end backsliding by being an engaged voter. If you vote and you're mindful of who you're voting for, you can do something big. As a local elected official myself, I assure you there is no such thing as off years when it comes to voting. After the midterms, pundits began speculating about 2024. 2024? What happened to 2023? School board and municipal elections are happening in your own backyard. Local lawmakers like me have more impact on your daily life than the president. We decide where your children go to school, whether you have clean water and safe roads, and if your parks, libraries, and police departments are funded. We're far more accessible, and yet turnout for our elections is extremely low. State and federal officials look to municipalities to decide which issues constituents care about. And upper-level officials often launch locally where just a handful of votes can decide an election. So voting locally is a small but important act. My grandfather was born to immigrants in 1899. As a child, I escorted him to the polls where he showed me how to do democracy. My job was to pull the lever in the voting booth. 20 years later, I brought my children with me to vote in every single primary, special, local, general, and school board election, and they voted the first time they were eligible. Voting should be an eagerly anticipated rite of passage like graduating or getting a driver's license. This is where you come in. Small actions like registering to vote and showing up for every election has a big impact. Your participation and decision to choose leaders who shun conspiracy theories and misinformation in favor of public servants who support democratic norms can reverse democratic backsliding and genocide-proof society. Local elections may seem small, but they have major consequences. If we don't take these actions, democracy will backslide so far, it'll be too late to repair. Small actions can lead to genocide instead of preventing it. During the Holocaust, malicious state officials expected professionals in all fields to collaborate with them for genocidal purposes, and they did. In 1933, the Germans voted the Nazis into power, and they lost their democracy when Hitler convinced the Reichstag to give him dictatorial powers. The Holocaust began with persecutions that required the complicity of professionals in every field. The Holocaust wasn't inevitable. Individuals, organizations, and governments chose to legalize discrimination, permit hatred, and ultimately mass murder. Good people became bad actors. They weren't forced to participate, but they participated with bad acts. They committed crimes of opportunity and benefited financially and professionally at the expense of their neighbors. Holocaust historian Peter Hayes said that his research taught him ethical behavior is hard. But Socrates said, ethics consists of knowing what we ought to do, and that can be taught. Holocaust education can address individual and group responsibility to confront state abuses of power, human rights violations, and genocidal acts. Ordinary Germans in all professions, often not even ideologically Nazis, participated in persecution and mass murder. Ordinary doctors, nurses, and scientists experimented on humans and killed thousands of people with disabilities to eliminate them from the gene pool. Ordinary engineers, architects, and planners designed the concentration camps and the machinery that made the genocide efficient. Ordinary lawyers, bureaucrats, and jurists drafted and enforced the laws that stripped the Jews of their rights and expelled Jewish colleagues from legal institutions. Ordinary journalists with the Associated Press compromised their integrity by giving Nazi propagandists rights of approval, letting them decide whether stories were printed. Ordinary civil servants watched as their Jewish peers, including Albert Einstein and other Nobel laureates, were forced to resign. Very few professors left with their Jewish colleagues. Ordinary teachers turned over students with undesirable traits to be sterilized. But Norwegian teachers prevented the Nazification of their school system while under occupation. Can we foster moral courage like the Norwegians did? Researchers say that we can. Moral courage is committing to your values despite personal cost. It's developed where personnel are valued and speaking up is incentivized rather than punished. Everybody has the ability to do the right thing. Think of a time that you were asked to abandon your values, but you refused. Was this challenging? What motivated your behavior? How did you feel about the outcome? Now think of a time that you were asked to abandon your values and you gave in. Consider the same questions. Individuals with moral courage aren't superhuman. They're us. Institutionalizing ethics and moral courage builds community and a sense of duty, empowering professionals to fight bad actors. But for that action to be effective, a large group needs to coalesce around a common purpose. In 1942, the Norwegian teachers were required to Nazify their school system. 3/4 of teachers refused to comply. The schools were closed and 200,000 parents protested. Some teachers were imprisoned. Others were put in a concentration camp. Still, the Gestapo was barely able to break them. The underground and the public continued to support the teachers, and they won. How did the Norwegian teachers avoid being Nazified? Well, a large group banded together quickly in solidarity against the Nazis. They exhibited moral courage by standing up for their values in the face of great danger, and they were supported by a community that valued them. They attached moral values to their professional purpose. And within 10 months, they prevented their school system from being victimized. You can do this too. Large problems can paralyze us. We want to help, but we don't know how, or we think our actions won't matter, but that's not true. You can implement ethical practices, exemplify moral courage, and change policy where you are right now. We all have assigned roles where we work and volunteer, but we can take small actions outside of those roles and make a big impact. As a member of my synagogue, I was the youth commission chair. I was unhappy that the synagogue always used styrofoam plates. Although it was outside my mandate, I researched the costs and I advocated for an alternative with the person who held decision-making power. It worked. Institutions are made of people, and people create change. Look at your roles with fresh eyes and find small actions that you can take to preserve democracy and institute change. Democracy will prevent genocide from happening. Failing democracy is a breeding ground for the genocidal process, but you are the key to preventing irreversible democratic backsliding. Political players who are held accountable are the least likely to act arbitrarily. Learning this was a wake-up call and a hopeful moment for me because I realized that we hold the power to protect society. Small actions like becoming a reliable voter who insists upon democratic norms and creating principled professionals will snuff out those genocidal sparks that can ignite. We can all save lives, and we can do it by preserving democracy.